Good to
Bye,
see
Doc.
you. Thank you for joining me for this. I really appreciate you taking time to sit down and talk to me. You've been a
Always.
legend on my bookshelf for many decades.
Sitting on your shelf.
Yeah, I've been trying to capture all the authors who inspired me through my childhood, and thank you for being one of them. Your first book, I got one of the $2 ones.
Yeah, that was the price.
Is
$2.
this the? It was this the very first printing?
I can't tell you if that was the first. The first printing looked like that, and the first printing was the $2 printing.
I
Uh,
have another one that's 250.
right. Well, I had to go up, but turned out that the $2, even in 1969 and 70, didn't really cover everything. But really, I had my purpose in writing the book in the beginning, and certainly uh, from then on, was just to get it out there. It was basically a revolutionary act by a small writer here in Oregon. I mean, I felt like if the only way to counter what was going on at the federal level and everywhere else in terms of the drug wars was to share information together in the community. And I knew once I put it out there, other people would pick it up and start adding to it and making it grow,
Yeah.
making it grow.
Yeah, you sparked the interest in quite a few of us, to say the least. When I asked Robert Clark if he had seen this book, he said, yeah. He said that's the book that kind of inspired me when he was in college to make one on his own. And he put out the Botany and Ecology of Cannabis, the
Which
same
is a
format,
beautiful book.
very similar.
Still the best. I mean, just a wonderful book.
Yeah, Rob, is quite the scientist. I mean, he certainly followed through with marijuana botany and then hashish and then cannabis. He's been an incredible asset, just like you, to the community. I think there's a small group of you that from the 70s, you, Mel Frank, Ed Rosenthal, Mountain Girl, Murphy Stevens, who really made a huge impact when it came to the understanding of cultivation for a lot of the community.
Well, and demystified it and tried to make it. I mean, look, it's just a plant. I mean, it's a wonderful plant. It's got all kinds of wonderful things about it. You can do all kinds of great things with it, but it's a plant.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think bringing it back down to that fact that we are growing flowers is something that seems to be lost upon a lot of people that
Doesn't
seem
it?
to think that it should be very expensive per pound. And my attitude is it should be almost worthless per pound because it literally grows on trees and anybody can grow it in practically all climates. I mean,
Sure.
obviously not the most northern climates, but in most places where humans are happy during the summer, you can pull off a small cannabis crop. So.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that too, because one of the things about that I think people don't really sit and think about is that the value per acre, even at I don't know what $300 a pound, right? The value per acre, there's practically nothing that a farmer can grow to support a family in a small community on let's say 5 or 10 acres that will, if the market is there, if the buyers are there, there's almost nothing that you can grow. That it used to be that farmers would grow a quarter acre of tobacco, regardless. They'd grow their own food, they'd grow stuff to sell, and they'd grow a quarter acre of tobacco as cash money.
Wow.
That quarter acre is what gave them the cash money to get through the year. Everything else was barter trade, so forth and so on. But and that I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers for generations. So all I'm saying is the model is there. If
Sure, in 1619, our first laws about cannabis were that you had to grow it on at least 10% of your farmland because we needed it as a natural resource. And the problem was is that farmers were not growing what we needed, which was hemp, and they were growing tobacco because they could easily sell it to the sailors who came to port. But unfortunately, they end up bartering everything they needed for the money they got because they weren't actually growing their own blankets and cloth and
which is
clothing.
where the quota system came from. If you want to get government subsidies for your tobacco, you have to be in the quota system. And the quota system tells you how much you can grow.
Wow. So there you have the control of it. I as much as I love to fantasize over the full liberation of cannabis, I think unfortunately it's always going to be controlled to some degree just because of how valuable it has always been through
Sure.
history.
It's a hugely valuable resource. It's as valuable as a gold mine, or literally.
Yeah, and Jack Harry used to, basically put forth that it was this crony capitalism of the early 20th century that really took cannabis out of its competitive advantage, because prior to nylon and a lot of the detergents that we use to make paper out of trees and sulfur synthetic chemicals into paints were being made out of cannabis hemp, with the oils and the fibers and the pulp of the plant for the paper, the paints,
Right.
the and it was really a purposeful removal is what they did, because they really wanted to force social acceptance of a new technology, and that new technology competed with the old technologies,
Also
which was
because
cannabis.
also because cotton is easier to spin, process, manufacture than hemp, and it's more profitable because of that. And that's why cotton was being planted all over the Americas, the South. Cotton and tobacco. Okay.
Right, continent,
And
right. Well, it was, hemp wasn't indigenous to the continent
no,
when they landed here, but it was the number one product that was on all of the ships that landed here. The ropes, the
absolutely.
sails, the maps, the
Much
Bibles, the
better
clothing.
fiber, far better fiber. Flax and
That
hemp
was
are
all they had.
superior. But
Yeah,
but but the industrialists cared about what was easy and cheap to manufacture, and cotton was a lot easier to manufacture. And so they basically did a marketing campaign and said, "Oh, hemp is coarse and low class, and only poor people wear hemp. People with any taste wear cotton."
of course. People don't realize, I think in a lot of it, the way we teach history, that we've only had a cotton gin since the late 1700s,
Eli Whitney.
91, right. So for over 180 years in the United States, unfortunately, slavery revolved around hemp and not around cotton. And really, it was only, through the 19th century and the 1800s that we actually saw slavery and cotton manufacturing happening at the same time, because we weren't even using it. And even to this day, there's never been, cotton sales for ships. Those have always been
Oh,
true
well, of
camp.
course not. They'd rip apart.
They'd rip
And with
apart.
salt water, because hemp will withstand salt water, cotton will just dissolve.
It's truly amazing, when you think about it. I once made the comment that cannabis was responsible for the cultural evolution of Eurasia. And the gentleman I told it to, which was a news reporter named Dan Rather, he said to me, Todd, don't you think that's a little extreme, the cultural evolution of Eurasia? And I said, well, was paper important? Was cloth important? All the great art is actually painted on canvas that's made from cannabis with pigments of oil that came also from the cannabis plant. Like, how could this not be a major contributor to our evolution and our culture? If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have the ships, the sails, the ropes, the Bibles, the maps, the clothing. We wouldn't have had the wherewithal to actually sail from Spain to the Bahamas or to America, which
And
wouldn't
the
have
new
happened.
world would have been much better off without us.
Things would be very different. And
Yeah.
and I always thought that it was culturally interesting to look at the Native Americans who didn't have readily available to them the cannabis hemp that we had in Europe, and they were not able to make things like paper or sails or ropes and such using the fibers because they just simply didn't have the plant.
No, they used tendons from animals and things like that. I mean, sure, reeds. I mean, some of the grass
Of course.
baskets. And all. I mean, the grass work that Native Americans had developed was just fabulous, and they made blankets and fabrics. They just didn't, have the long fiber. That's the key, as you know, to hemp and flax is the length of the
The
fiber.
length of the fiber. That's absolutely right. And it's key to its strength. But when you look at even the invention of paper, what you're famous for
Yep.
is
Yep.
it was invented with hemp and mulberry. And,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, there was no paper invented on the North American continent prior to them arriving here. So I think that the Native Americans, so to speak, were at a severe disadvantage,
No
unfortunately, to
printing presses.
yeah, so some of the revisions of your book are really really cool, and this is I love the leaf on this. I don't know where you came up with that design, but I thought it was really rad.
Well, I can't take credit for it. A book like that's the product of a lot of people.
You're very humble. This one is one of my favorites with the Curlin photography, which
That's
actually
wonderful.
shows the energy coming out from around Canada. Do you remember this photo? Could you talk a little bit about it?
Oh yes, I can. I remember some of it. I first encountered the British researcher who was doing Kirlian photography in a journal back in the late '70s, and I wrote him. In those days, you wrote to people, and
Sent it
and
through post, did you, and
I
waited on a
posted, I
reply?
posted a letter to him, and a month or two later, I got a letter back, and I actually dropped a big dime and got on the phone, and he agreed to share the publisher needed the negative of his photographs. In those days, you had to have
Sure.
plates and negatives, so they did all that, and in the process. So there were a whole bunch of different photographs that turned up, and this was the one they chose for the cover. But wish I could remember his name. He's a delightful person, very generous in sharing it.
That's really cool. I have another book that has some of the Curlin photography with it, and it is a fascinating study in the way that it detects the energy emitted from various objects. And this is supposedly the electronic aura, if you will, of it basically captured and photographed.
Well, and as I think I've shared with you, as soon as the science issue of Grow Magazine comes out, I've got an article in there on magnetic and electrical energy in plants, and looking at the science around it that has basically been missed by Western science, but it's definitely there. There's a lot of testable, very simple ways that people can try for themselves and see what the effects are of magnets, for example, on germinating seeds, or of DC current on flowering plants, all kinds of things like that. Very interesting stuff, and consistent with what the Kirlian photographs were picking up. The plants not only emit energy, but plants actually emit sound.
Yeah. One of the things that I was really surprised with is I feel like when you go through these books, you were truly ahead of your time. You have a picture here about marijuana and herb for the aging. And I really think that it does help. It's funny, you get this photo of this gentleman, I guess his name is um Wondon, W-O,
He was
Worden
the
McDonald, author of
he
An
was the dad
Old
of
Guy Who
Country
Feels
Joe's.
Good.
That's Country Joe's father.
Country
Country,
Joe McDonald?
yeah, that was Country Joe's
Fits
dad.
in a dye rag from Give Me an F?
That was Country Joe's dad.
No shit.
No shit.
And he made it into a marijuana book. That sounds like his son was just ready to chip off the old block. But now,
I'd
I
forgotten
guess
that.
this guy was old to you back then, huh? This was 50 years ago.
You know what? He was definitely an old gray beard, man.
You're hilarious. How do you feel? Now you're 80 years old. You're one of the most robust guys I know. How do you feel cannabis has helped you through the years, through your own aging?
I owe it all to cannabis. Those wonderful 95-year-olds sitting there with a cigarette and a glass of whiskey in a rocking chair on the front porch.
Yeah.
Well, I have absolutely no idea whether it has been because I've used cannabis every day since I was 18, with very few exceptions. But I've been blessed with a healthy life, and so far so good.
Sure.
There's an awful lot of people who've worked an awful lot harder at being healthy than I have, who have not been graced with the health I have, and I just feel very grateful. That's all.
Yeah, genetics obviously play a big role in the whole staying healthy thing.
I don't know. My parents both had terrible health histories, but you know,
Wow. Well,
yeah.
it's interesting because it makes you wonder if a lot of it was environmental, if we are predisposed to have problems, but unless we are exposed to various things in our environment, maybe those things don't happen. I've always wondered why I started getting tumors when I was when I was only 2 years old. Because when I was a little kid, I was a little Catholic boy. I was like, what did I do? but it really isn't anything I did. Really, it was
No,
probably just
and most likely it was something that happened to you when you were still a fetus, and there was some kind of chemical exposure that occurred, and that's, I mean, typically what happens with diseases in very young children. It's not something they're exposed to after birth; it's something they're exposed to before birth, and that's just the way
well, we'll never
most.
know. My
No,
particular disease was so few people had it that it goes unstudied. It's considered an orphan
orphan
disease.
disease they call them. Yeah, less than
Yeah.
200,000 people, and they dismiss it.
That's correct. There was only 1 million births in 1970. So like basically me and four other kids
You little kids, what the fuck? Yeah,
potentially. Well, that brings me to this book, this cool old book that you did, the Connoisseur's Handbook of Marijuana.
yeah, yeah. That was
How did
wonderful.
this come apart? About not apart. How did this come about,
It's
Bill?
apart easily.
It comes apart easy. You just open it up. Yeah, but how did this
Yeah,
happen after your Cultivator's Handbook?
yeah.
It looks like you went into the direction of history and culture, and I find that really fascinating because I've been an editor um, of Jack Herr's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, since 1994, and I feel as if you captured a lot of the history decades before, and I just want
Well, the history is there. I mean, to be continually revisited. It's kind of like clothing fashions that come around every 30 or 40 years. History is there to be rediscovered, and part of what my sort of self-appointed role as a writer has been to go out and find really interesting stuff that other people discovered and wrote about and lived their lives around in many cases, like Dr. Chandra Bose in India, and the communications in plants, and try to point to it, bring it back, and put it forward in a context that made it relevant. In this case, writing about how to grow cannabis was also an opportunity to write about some of the other things about the plant world that fascinated me and that I was discovering in those days. I'd been so anyway. That's where that came from, and then the culture side of it. I don't know how many people know it, but I've kind of lived a double life. As my other life was teaching as a professor of cross-cultural communications in the university level, and I've written a number of books in that area. So I kind of had these parallel. I mean, I love plants. I love people. I love sort of the intricacies of the plant world and the intricacies of of human culture. And in many ways, we are like wonderful flowers.
Yeah, and we're fragile and we're unique. I feel as if you really were, obviously an author, but with what you were doing, very much an activist by bringing this information to
Oh,
the
I was
light.
intended to. I was trying to throw a turd on the table at the party for sure. John Mitchell and Richard Nixon and all those assholes. Absolutely. I was it was deliberately thumbing my nose at them on purpose. Uh, I just I've always gotten off on doing that. I don't know why, but
Well, I think you're definitely a rebel spirit, and clearly, with what you were publishing, you were not afraid of speaking truth to power. Because really, when you go back, then there wasn't a whole lot of you guys. I mean, you really are the first cultivation book. Prior to everything in my collection, the only thing that is teaching people how to grow cannabis was a Mary Jane Cultivators hand, and it was more of like a pamphlet than it was a book. You, in my opinion, wrote the first modern cannabis cultivation book.
well,
The
it was one of I was one of the first for sure, and there were people. There was a guy. Now it's coming back. Now I hadn't thought of it for years, but a guy who wrote "Grow Your Own Stone." It was Dr. Alexander Schumach.
Yeah, real name's Roddy Heading. He worked for me when I was the editor in chief of Hemp Life in 1996, living in Amsterdam. I met him through Rob Clark.
It was a
His book
fine book. That was a fine book.
that was it. It came out though. I have original copies of that. Didn't come out till 75, 76.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
have first drafts of that. He also did Hashish, which was absolutely a super cool book. Roddy's a great artist,
Yeah,
as
the
well as
drawings in the book I remember very well. Yeah,
yeah. And he did that. That was a criminal act in Canada at the time. He could have been actually put to jail for incitement for what
the
he did.
people who translated my Cultivator's Handbook into French in the mid '80s did go to jail. They were a collective, a cooperative in Quebec, and they translated Cultivators Handbook into French. So they did it, and then they contacted me and said, "Hope you don't mind." And I wrote back and I said, "No, I don't mind at all. That's a compliment. Send me a little money if you sell any." And then next I heard they were in jail because of doing it. And they basically an extended family, multiple parents, lots of children, and the Canadian authorities came in and took the parents, put them in jail, and just threw the kids to the winds, as far as I know. And it was
Canada was screwed. It blows my mind because in the late 80s, early 90s, you couldn't even sell High Times in Canada on the shelf legally. It was such a backwards ass country. And, now look at how much they've advanced with legal producers. And
Canada is a great example of the influence of religion on politics. I mean,
and not in a positive way.
The rigidity of Canadian drug laws comes directly from their sort of the religious community up there.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. And, but hopefully cannabis is convincing everybody, because no matter who it is, that we all have an endocannabinoid system. And, this is what more people are realizing. You opened this book right here, the Cultivators, the Connoisseur's Handbook, with this quote from the report by the Advisory Committee on Drug Dependence from Great Britain, 1968.
Right.
And I wouldn't mind taking a minute. And it's one of the reasons why I feel that what you were doing was very politically charged. And the quote is, "The evidence before us shows that increasing numbers of people, mainly young in all classes of society, are experimenting with this drug, and substantial numbers use it regularly for social pleasure. There is no evidence that this activity is causing violent crime or aggressive antisocial behavior, or is producing an otherwise normal people conditions of dependence or psychosis requiring medical treatments. The experience of many other countries is that once it is established, cannabis smoking tends to spread. In some parts of Western society where interest in mood-altering drugs is growing, there are indications that it may become a functional equivalent to alcohol." If that isn't true, I don't know what could
be. You knew
be.
what they were talking about.
Yeah, we're talking like 3 years ago. It's amazing. And I thought, interesting that you felt that was so important that you opened the entire book with that.
Well,
and then under it, you have the cool little guy saying, "A quest into the unknown.
Onward.
Onward we go."
Yeah. Well,
was there any pushback in your being so political?
Well, I can't say so. No, I mean, I was, I know I was sort of watched carefully for quite a while, but the reason I wrote Cultivators Handbook in the beginning was that I had been doing a little bit of growing around Eugene, and friends of mine were getting busted. I've told the story before, and I don't belabor it, but one of my friends was shot dead in a raid, and I had my wife and I then were about to have a child, and I just realized I had to stop growing and selling marijuana. And a friend suggested that I just write a little grow book, tell people how to do it. And she was she was an SDS organizer, and she was a pretty volatile political young woman, and I thought it was a great idea. So I basically just went home and sat down and did it. I had an IBM Selectric, which the old folks among us may remember, a little ball with Courier 12 type. I was writing papers for students at the University of Oregon. They'd pay me to write their term papers or their research papers for us. So I was into writing, and the University of Oregon Library. The University of Oregon was a land grant university, so it had the entire all the publications of the U.S. Department of all U.S. government agencies land grant universities had to have every issue of every publication of every agency. So it was all there. I mean, that part of it. And then I managed to get back to Washington, D.C. and get into the Library of Congress. I got a pass from a representative, I forget who. But anyway, I spent a couple of weeks in the stacks of the Library of Congress, which are amazing places. There is so much knowledge in there that is just, you just want to there's not enough time in 100 lifetimes to absorb a fraction of it. And it's not just books,
Yeah.
documents of
No,
all kinds.
no, it's
Actually,
really
it
quite.
goes not 38 floors below street level, as I recall.
Wow. Wow. So it was quite the adventure. I mean,
Oh
it
yeah,
seems like you spent most of the 70s on quite the cannabis adventure, with putting all
yeah.
these books out. The Marijuana Food Handbook.
Now that's a different story. My wife and I were living in Santa Fe, and I'd started the Santa Fe Natural Tobacco Company. We were I was My wife and I were experimenting with cannabis butter. So, and some friends of ours, a good friend of ours, very quickly developed a very severe case of cancer, lung cancer, combined with others, and couldn't smoke anything. And so we developed, some recipes for him, and kind of went on from there, and realized that. And again, this was what this book was about. Was saying, look, this is not a party drug. This is a heal yourself medicine,
Right.
and you don't have to smoke it, because in the early '80s, people were really getting agitated about smoking, and so we figured, well, especially with our experience with our friend who couldn't smoke because of his health, and it was just too hard on his body to inhale hot gas. But the edibles worked great. We even I should probably say this on in public, but we actually even developed a cannabis enema for it.
Yeah, no, what's ironic is the one patent on cannabis suppositories is held by Muhammad Asoli of the University of Mississippi. And my lawyer made a joke about it in court back in the 90s, with Asoli there, saying that, isn't it interesting that the federal government would take something that was passed hand to hand, mouth to mouth, in a show of, unity and peace and love, and turn it into something you have to shove up your
Stick up
ass
your ass.
and get high on. If that ain't government intervention, nothing is.
Um, yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Anyway, that's where the marijuana foods book was originally supposed to be called medicinal marijuana foods, but
oh
the
wow.
but the publisher's lawyer had a problem with that.
Yeah, right. FDA kind of things, like what are you purporting it does?
Yeah, but if you read through the book, at that point in the early 1980s, there was plenty of research on the medical properties, medical benefits of cannabis.
Chapter 3, the medical uses of marijuana.
Yep.
Yeah. Clearly, Bill. I applaud you on so many levels, because I feel like not only were you putting out really relevant information that was decades ahead of its time, you were really trying to teach people. I mean, to put a chapter together about medical marijuana in 1981, which is copyright on this book, 1980, is so far ahead of the curve. It's incredible. I mean, the Federation for American Scientists wouldn't come out and call cannabis a whole raw medicine until 1994, 14 years later or so. So you were so far ahead of the curve. It blows my mind,
But lots
in
of
all
other people
reality.
were too. I wasn't the only person talking about truly, truly. There were lots of people who knew it. It's not like I was any kind of pioneer. I took, nobody owns ideas. Ideas come out of somewhere and we share them. And sometimes somebody gets an idea first and says it, but that doesn't mean that it's their idea. So there was a tremendous amount of awareness floating around with regard to cannabis as a medicine. So I can't take any credit for that. I'll take credit for some pretty cool recipes. As granted, they need to be updated, and unfortunately, I'm not able to get to the book and update it because it's owned by a publisher who doesn't want it updated. But the basic idea is in there. I'm particularly fond of tequila extract of cannabis. Uh,
Oh, yeah. Well, the alcohol definitely works really well.
yeah.
Over here on page 41, you have a chapter about it on, or at least a passage about it in cancer therapy, and
Yep.
you citing the government's 1974 studies, no doubt. And personally for me, I mean, nobody owns an idea, but there weren't a lot of people putting forth these ideas, even in the early 90s when I got involved. And to see that you were pushing these ideas going back a decade before, and realistically, even in the Connoisseur's Handbook, 1971, which was even, I was
Yeah.
only born in 1970, Bill. So, you
My
were,
son, my son was born in 1970. So yeah, right.
yeah, you're right. So you're quite enlightened for your time. And then this one I really also think is a cool book, the International Cultivators book, because this
That was
covers
fun.
more than just cannabis.
That was fun. That was fun. I see a comment, tequila herb extract sounds like a blackout. Nope, just a nice buzz.
That's really great.
Yeah, so that book was basically, as I'd been after I got out of Peace Corps. I was in Peace Corps in Africa in the mid '60s, and spent a lot of time after Peace Corps traveling through North Africa, Middle East, you know, and Europe. Spent time in the League of Nations, United Nations Library in Geneva. League of Nations was the UN of the 1920s, and they did a huge amount of research into cannabis and hashish in the Middle East. Just enormous. I mean, there was stacks and stacks and stacks of reports full of grainy old photographs and stuff. So I, in those days, of course, there's no such thing as a digital camera. You know, you had to use copy machines, and you can imagine what was involved in using a copy machine in the League of Nations Library in Geneva, Switzerland in 19. You know, you had to have all kinds of clearance, and what do you want to make a copy for, and all that. So anyway, I'd collected a lot of stuff over the course of several trips, and then I was lucky to have good friends at book people at Berkeley, who were they'd originally been the book distribution arm of the Whole Earth Catalog. Then they became an independent book distribution collective. Then they became then they formed a publishing company called Wingbow Press, and they had been distributing Cultivator's Handbook for me for a while. So it was just natural to go to Terry Nemeth, who was the publisher at the time, just say, "Hey, you know, I've got all this great stuff. Love to write a book on it. What do you think?" And they thought it was a great idea, so I did it.
It's really cool, to see a chapter on the grades of Egyptian hashish is just, it makes me long for an internationally legal market where we could get, Nepalese or Pakistani or Egyptian hashish in various grades.
It's coming
And
in your lifetime. It's coming easily in your lifetime.
I hope so. I think that it'll definitely change the world for the better when more people can use cannabis the way that we have for so many decades. And it's interesting seeing you mix it with cannabis, hashish, poppies in this book. I mean, because obviously, here in America we don't really associate poppies and cannabis together. I don't know anybody who's ever homegrown poppies, but it is the norm all over the world. you
Sure.
know
Well, you know those lovely tie sticks that everybody, well, the early, not before tie sticks, they're the equivalent of tie sticks. I forget what they were called, out of Vietnam. And the thing that everybody loved about them is they had been, when opium is being made into its final ball stage, the liquid around it, in it's called different things in different places. I heard it called pasewa, which is just, anyway. So that then the cannabis was dipped in that, uh, and it was allowed to dry. So you've got a little bit of an opium hit off of the cannabis as well. And that's just one example. I'm sure, I've never spent any time in Southeast Asia. There's people listening here who know far more than I do. But I know for a fact that opium and cannabis uh, and other plants uh, are just part of the whole apothecary, the whole
Sure.
natural apothecary.
Well, for hundreds, if not thousands of years prior to us having, pharmacopoeias and a better understanding of the molecules around us, I mean, we only had our experience and the plants that surrounded us to really work with,
Yep.
you know.
And one of the reasons that sugar and tobacco had such an impact on Europe, I mean, and coffee, was because the Europeans had the only way they had ever altered their consciousness prior to the so-called New World was with really crude alcohol, not even very good alcohol. And
Wow.
that was it. maybe some mushrooms that, but by and large there were no recreational substances in Europe prior to the 16th century, which is why all the poetry and music and everything suddenly starts happening.
Wow, around the cannabis and yeah.
Absolutely, all these sugar. I mean, now kids grow up with sugar, so the idea that sugar could be a wow experience is totally foreign, but it was.
Oh yeah, no, it must have been like, huge, almost. Yeah, it's still a drug to many people. I mean, when you look at the 32 ounce and 64-ounce damn big gulp drinks or whatever the fuck,
then you
people are obviously ridiculous about what they're picking up.
then you look at
On page
diabetes and
90,
obesity. Yeah,
yeah, on page 99, you talk about cannabis and folk medicine.
yeah.
And I think it's really cool how you talk about it being part of the Arab medical system in Iran and various systems throughout the Arab world. Um, was it surprising, as someone like, that was growing some pot in Oregon to go on this educational journey and to learn this deep history?
Well, it's on the one hand, the answer is yes. It's always surprising. On the other hand, I had actually trained to go to Iran in Peace Corps, and then got changed to where I wound up in Chad, and so I'd had an interest in Iran for a long time, and uh, I still think that, well, I don't think there is a whole tradition of natural herbal medicines in Iran involving things that like saffron, as saffron, lavender oil, saffron and lavender and sesame oil intranasally are used to assist in opioid withdrawal in Iran, and they work apparently. Anyway, there's a whole traditional medicine in Iran that is exquisite. It's people recognize that China goes back 5,000 years and that they have all kinds of herbal knowledge and so on. So, well, Iran too, Persia, right? So anyway, it's a wonderful for anybody who wants to study natural medicines and has not yet looked at Iran. They have a there's scholars publish all the time. They've got research universities. Uh, it's wide open.
Yeah, yeah. I can, you have on page 104 this another uses of cannabis, and in a couple sentences you say medicine being, general medicine, has backed off from outright naysaying and is now taking the position that marijuana has no recognized medical value. The key word, of course, is recognized. Some such qualifier is inadvertently used when the issue of marijuana's place in the medical heavens is raised. In fact, marijuana is a very useful drug. In time, its usefulness will be found to extend even to some of those areas most jealously guarded by the AMA. However, before most of marijuana's useful applications can be formally admitted to practice, medical imagination will have to be stimulated.
I forgot I wrote that. That wasn't bad.
No, it's really cool, Bill. I mean, this is what, considering you penned this, this book, copyright 1974, fucking amazing to think this was you 48 years ago and it's been taking this long for countries like, look at Thailand, just legalized the other day. Look at America, still hasn't. Canada still won't let their citizens home grow cannabis.
It's
I
not
mean,
amazing. It's tragic.
it's tragic. It's criminal in all reality. It's weird as it may sound for all the, the cops and the prosecutors, the judges and the jailers that locked me up for being a criminal, for breaking their laws. I actually always saw them as the criminals, by wielding their ignorance and their power over other people's lives for no fucking reason other than to just seek dominance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's so much to say about that, but the people who are executing the criminal policies are willing accomplices at a minimum. Whether they actually would ever be able to see themselves as the criminals that we know they are is very doubtful, because they've got a whole belief system built around the the idea that it is the the people who they are assigned to go after who are the criminals. They're like, go fetch, you throw a stick and the good dog goes and fetches.
Yeah. You wrote this back in the day that kind of blows my mind. You wrote, I believe that the elderly would be prime beneficiaries of a wise policy of marijuana administration, particularly those legions of old people who are benignly but firmly imprisoned in rest homes, nursing homes, and other such golden age purgatories. Life in these places is by and large tasteless, hopeless, deaf, and dumb, colorless, and without happiness. As people grow old, their sensory pathways deteriorate. Much of the deterioration comes from disuse. In most places where the old people are put away, no effort is made to stimulate them. On the contrary, they are generally sedated on the barbaric theory that if they don't realize what they're missing, they won't care, and incidentally, won't cause trouble with their compliance.
Complaints.
Complaints, yeah, sorry. But you really are, again, blowing my mind because I think realistically, it is the elderly that could benefit a great deal, you know?
A cannabis party in a nursing home? Give me a
Come
break,
on.
and logging, and then we log on to YouTube and we visit 1955 while we're getting high. Come on.
No, it did. It's what you said. Marijuana would turn old people on once again. Food would become
Absolutely.
tasty and desirable. The blind munchies is no respecter of age. Music appreciation could become a new experience, even for those who had never before turned on to music and sound.
That's right.
Form and color senses would be stimulated, and old people would be able to spend hours absorbed in the sensual experiences of red and green and blue. I gotta say, Bill, I think that, for a young cat, you were really looking forward down the road quite a bit. And your faith in cannabis to be able to assist humanity, to me, is really the most inspirational thread of all your books because you clearly loved cannabis and you were clearly coming at it from almost every friggin' angle to try to convince your readers that, hey, you should love this stuff too.
Yeah.
And
Unfortunately, it's always preaching to the choir.
Well, you know what the sad part is, Bill, is I feel like, as we sit here 48 years after you published this book, it blows my mind that the choir is only now showing up to church on many levels. And it's you really were a canary in the coal mine decades and decades and decades ago because everything I read through here is really where we're at now in the understanding that we have cannabis as a medical use, in understanding its history better, in understanding its useful applications, its place in history. You were really ahead of everyone. I mean, even Jack Fraser's book didn't come out till 1974, which was the wonderful book called The Hemp Farmers, which
Yeah.
showed the history of cannabis cultivation in the Americas after the Spaniards arrived. And there wasn't many of you that were actually doing this work and bringing this information to the people.
Well,
And
one of the things I hope will happen if anybody is listening to this and they'll look around and find the young people, the people 30, 40, 50 years old now who are looking forward and saying, "Hey, pay attention to this." Because that's one of the worst things about being young and looking ahead is that well, first of all, there's an awful lot of tendency to run tell the king the sky is falling, and you got to watch that when you're young. But but if you got something legitimate to say, older people really need to make a path for young people who have a contribution to make, and that wasn't done when I was young, and I doubt it's being done now.
no, I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, guys like you, I mean, I suspect in 1970, 71, you were in your early 20s.
Yeah, I was born in 41, so yeah, 30. I was 30 in 71.
Right. So in all reality, though, you were still part of the younger guard. Being dismissed by the older crowd, and just felt like what you had to say was basically,
I had
you
just
know,
become untrustworthy because I just turned 30.
never trust anyone over 30. That was the saying back then. That is
Okay.
hilarious. And
Yeah.
then you started putting out all these marijuana books to subvert society. Clearly,
Well, just doing what I enjoy doing, and thank goodness for the folks who have helped me along the way.
no, it's cool. So these days, you're writing for Grow Magazine.
Yeah, I'm writing for Grow. I'm also writing for this great genetics company called Authentic Genetics. I'm doing some work for them,
I
and
certainly appreciate the
we're
information you've been putting on our website for sure.
hey, well, I appreciate the opportunity to do it. It's one of the really fulfilling things about talking with you and writing for Grow and being on Instagram is reaching out and connecting with people. I have a pretty solitary life as a writer, and it's kind of my nature anyway. I'm not a social person, so I really love finding out what other people are doing, sharing ideas. It's just fun,
No, it's
especially when
great.
you're an old guy. Having a young person who's willing to sit there for even a few minutes while I talk about the old days is totally gratifying.
You're hilarious. Um, well, it's a pleasure being in your audience, and I I I find this stuff fascinating. I think I owe my health to cannabis. I owe my sanity, my happiness, and it's to me a real pleasure to be able to connect with people like yourself who were the textbooks of my childhood. Because when I was a kid in the '80s, you were writing books about cannabis. I was afraid to draw a pot leaf on my notebook at school because I didn't want to get in trouble for, the stigma that would follow me right all the way home. And
But then you weren't afraid.
well, my mom was a funny person. She held up a bong once and she said, "What is this?" And I said, "A bong." And she said, "No, you've never seen it before. You've never seen it before." And then
I don't know.
she held up a pack of Easy Wider roller papers and she said, "What are these?" I said, "Easy Wider." She goes, "No, you've never seen these before. You don't know what they are."
The
She was
answer
like,
to
"They
the
will take
comment.
you away from me. They
The
will
answer,
put you away and lock you up." And
that's
I was
funny.
like, "For your pot?" And she's like, "Yes, you'll never see your parents again." I was like, "Oh my God, these people are evil." And
They,
that was the lesson my mom sent me to school with, because she had such a distrust of the establishment and the
Boy,
powers
was
that
she's a smart mom.
yeah, she was a hippie. If it wasn't for my mom smoking weed with me in 1979 when I was going through chemotherapy and radiation, my whole cancer experience could have ended much differently. My whole life could have been much shorter, in my humble opinion.
From everything I know, I agree. I think that's got to be the case. And when you said earlier, how has do I think that cannabis has played a role in my health? Yes. Uh, I I know that CBD has healed my wife. Her gut was burned out by a doctor who gave her the wrong antibiotics for a serious operation years ago. We She wound up with leaky gut. She went Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Though, what happens when your gut's burned out by antibiotics? And there was never going to be any hope of rebuilding her gut. But she started taking CBD years ago, and over time, been the only thing. No medications would touch it, but she is now basically healed after about 5 years. It's
Wow. How many milligrams does she take a day?
She takes 200 a day now. She started taking 50 a day, and she's gradually upping it. She probably could be taking more, but it's just anybody who has IBS or any kind of a gut issue, really, and even after taking antibiotics. For any kind of a disease, if you're going to take probiotics to restore your gut microbiome, absolutely take CBD as well.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's really good advice. You have your own website too, Panacea Chronicles?
Yeah, I do. I do. I rant and rave a lot.
Have a lot on your mind, clearly. I
Yeah.
will leave a link to your website in the description of the
Oh,
video so
thank you.
people can
That's
find
great.
that
Yeah.
well as
Yeah.
well.
More than anybody wants to know about the health impact of inhaling pesticides from tobacco and cannabis.
Yeah, that's something that you've been focusing on a lot. One of the things that was surprising is you brought up it wasn't the banned pesticides that people should be concerned with. It is the approved pesticides that are used on the legally produced cannabis and tobacco that people should seriously be concerned with. Uh, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that. Kind of what brought that up into your life. What brought you to the focus on the legal
Wow.
pesticides being a problem.
Well, it's been a long journey. I started, really, my whole interest in pesticides started back as I was uh, researching the uh, Cultivator's Handbook and thinking about what to write. I didn't write about pesticides then because that wasn't really the only connection back in the 60s between pesticides and cannabis in most people's mind was the paraquat and Agent Orange that the U.S. government was spraying on Mexican cannabis. And so I started looking into what the health effects of inhaling those pesticides were, and I quickly discovered that there was, at that point and to this day, not a single one of the pesticides that is being registered for use has been tested for its health effects, but when its exposure occurs by inhalation, never, not once. And
That's
yeah,
charming.
isn't it? And
Yeah, and that's how all of the people who are consuming it off tobacco are inhaling it, are
that's
using it. They're
that's
burning
correct.
it and inhaling it.
Now you put that alongside, there have been numerous studies on the effects of inhaling environmental pesticides in the air from spray.
Right. Unvolatilized, if you will,
Well,
or
and
non-volatilized, right?
yeah, right. Well, yeah, suspended vapor, basically. And of course,
Suspended vapor, but not burned. But when
well,
it's heated up, it turns into, some of them at least, turn into entirely different
it's
problems.
called dry distillation
Okay.
by heat. And so coming out of a burning, let's say a burning cigarette or joint, ahead of the coal, far ahead of the coal, are the easily volatilized substances are volatilized, and they're the first part of the smoke column. Then come the combustion byproducts, which are the organic uh, uh, material, including organic chemicals that are contaminants like pesticides or any other organic material, and the leaf material, flour, and that gets volatilized. That comes in, and then comes the carbonized stuff and all that. And there are also gases that are liberated during the combustion product that have nothing to do with vapor. Or then finally there's the particulate matter, basically the soot, the burned carbon, which is why I've stopped smoking and I only vape. And I try to only vape organically grown cannabis. I'm not able to grow my own right now, but I would if I could, and everybody should, because you know what's on it. But the bottom line is that with pesticides, it is absolutely not the dosage that matters. It no lo- With the new pesticides, particularly the neonicotinoids, their dosage is irrelevant. It's the timing of the exposure on the site of the exposure. One of the most critical is fetal exposure.
Oh,
Because inhaled pesticides, you know this, inhaled pesticides don't go through the first pass detoxification in the liver. They go direct to the
right.
bloodstream and right across the placenta. So anyway, as you can tell, if you, I said Panacea Chronicles is a rant.
Though, I find it really interesting because, you're such a great researcher and putting this together. It's, it, doing the math, so to speak, for the readers is really a valuable contribution because it helps people to really figure out or to see connections and things that maybe they didn't see it already.
That's it.
And that is something I think is really important because what's not being considered in the legal cannabis industry are the legal pesticides that are being allowed to be sprayed on these plants
Right.
prior to them being packaged and put on the shelf. That's really one of the main reasons I tell people they should grow their own because it's the only way they can truly control what has been used on your plant.
This also, in my mind, really points to an opportunity for individual small growers, small farmers, and that is to become or truly organic flower producers. Because once people realize that what pesticides, the connection between pesticide exposure and diabetes, pesticide exposure causes type 2 diabetes, pesticide exposure and obesity, pesticide exposure causes inflammatory obesity. All you have to do is Google pesticide diabetes, pesticide obesity, and then realize that means any pesticide, any quantity at the wrong time for your body metabolism, for whatever's going on. And there are different, it gets complicated, not really complicated.
Sure, of course. How do you feel about orally ingested pesticides that are on some of our food?
They all go, well, first of all, they're all tested for
They're tested for oral consumption, but
ingestion.
what your main concern is they're not tested for combustible
They're,
consumption.
they're, they're tested for dermal exposure and they're tested for ingestion. They're never once, not a single pesticide that's ever been registered has ever once been tested for its effect by smoking. And there's a real good reason. And that is you can't set up an experiment where you expose one group to inhaled pesticides and the other group doesn't get exposed. The ethics committee would shut you down immediately. So in other words, it's a dilemma. But the resolution is not a bureaucratic or a regulatory, it's a market solution. And that is that people start realizing for themselves what these chemicals are doing to the world, and then make a commitment to produce cannabis without those chemicals, and tell people the story. And enough people, I think, there's enough sickness and enough unexplained disease out there. The last 50 years, the number of diseases that have emerged they're not coming out of nowhere. They're coming out. I think they're coming out of chemicals. I think the better living through chemistry is a joke.
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think chemical exposure, people have been having problems with cannabis, saying that, some people that have been using it have been having really violent reactions to it. And I've often wondered if it was really caused by chemical sensitivity, because when, look at peanuts, they're everywhere. But, for some people, when they get that peanut residue, they are screwed. And I think the same
Absolutely.
thing could be for some of the chemicals that are being used in cannabis.
You take any of the chemicals that are legal for cannabis, and Google that chemical name and the word neurological,
And see what pops up.
Then Google that chemical's name and fetal, and see what pops up. And you could go on, right?
Right. No. Hey, you're making a great, case of why we should
They
be
don't
growing
need
our
me
own
to tell them.
cannabis.
They don't need me to tell them. All they need maybe is for me to say, "Hey, Google it and see."
Sure.
Then
But the unfortunate part is that a lot of the pesticides that are used, you know, in a sense have half-lives, and they're not detectable in the amounts that would fail them in the labs,
right,
even though they're still present to a degree on the plant.
right,
I would prefer to eat, like, this is something I grew myself.
yeah.
Nothing was sprayed on it but essential oils. But this isn't the case for a lot of commercial cannabis. Unfortunately, you really don't know what was used through production. And there are a lot of the things that are accepted for use through production, I wouldn't use in production on my own cannabis.
And absolutely not a single one of the regulated legal fungicides or insecticides or any of those sides, which ought to be a clue, have ever been tested for exposure by inhalation. But there's a couple of other factors here. They've never been tested in combination. All the pesticides that are registered have only been tested as themselves, not in combination with others. And there's plenty of research showing that the combinatorial effects of pesticides, 2 + 2 = 7, so to speak. And then you've got the factor of bioaccumulation. Tiny little trace amounts, even below the level of detection, if they are the wrong chemical in the wrong place at the wrong time, you don't even know they're there. Again, the argument is either grow your own or buy it from a very trusted source. And for the cannabis growers who are in business on a large scale, try to figure out how you can serve your customers' interests better. I mean, it may be impossible to grow cannabis indoors without chemicals. I don't know. I do know that you can sun grow it just fine
No,
without.
no. I've been growing indoors organically for decades, really. I mean, it's not hard at all.
Well, there you go. Okay,
You
so yeah,
Yeah, there's citric acids and there's essential oil combinations
your
to deal
essential
with
oil stuff
funguses
is
and
great.
bugs.
You need to
Yeah,
tell people. You need to tell more people what you've discovered about essential oils.
definitely. I mean, you actually will be publishing some of the stuff that you wrote in relation to it. I think that these are some real great advancements when it comes to naturally dealing with, common agricultural problems with cannabis, but doing it in a non, synthetic chemical way.
And the real problem with synthetic chemicals is that, so look, a chemical is, these are called, they're signalers. They carry messages. A particular chemical it's like a piece of software. It's designed to migrate through your body and to hook up with a receptor on your cell surface and to deliver a message into the cell. Do this, do that. And so these chemicals are designed in labs to send messages to the cells, to different cells, different organs, different things in your body, sending them messages to do this, do that. The messages that are sent by insecticides to the bug's nervous system is fry yourself. Or I mean, I'm being simplistic, but
Sure. No, I understand exactly what you mean because it's
these
attacking their
chemicals,
nervous system.
yeah. So these chemicals are like little software programs, only they're biological software, if you want, or something like that. And that's why they're dangerous, not because they're chemicals. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, everything's chemicals. It's that they're designed to do a certain thing to certain biological systems, and the nervous system of an insect and the nervous system of a mammal and a human being are not that different, and neither are the endocrine systems. So we haven't
No,
even
I see your concern clearly.
yeah. Anyway, this is I can hear the uh, sets turning off right now. It's not a subject that people are entertained by, but it's an
No,
opportunity.
but it's interesting, Bill. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, and I mean, urging people to grow organically, or at least to grow in a way that's not contaminating the end product is definitely where it's at.
And here's why. I mean, there's 32 million diagnosed type 2 diabetics in the country, for example, and that's just diagnosed type 2. So that's 10% of the American population, and uh, it, all you have to do is Google pesticide diabetes. That's all you have
Yeah,
to
it's amazing. Yeah. Well, I people can read more at Panacea Chronicles. You talk about it extensively, and
do.
they
Nobody's
said,
going to go after this.
no, well, though there are a lot of us that are doing research, and
Oh, I know.
again appreciate you sharing all of this
I
information with us,
appreciate you
just
asking.
as I did when I was a kid and I picked up your book for the first time, and I thought, no way. It was like a code book to being a wizard or some shit. It was like there's a way to make marijuana all by myself,
Yes, little boy, let me show you how.
yeah, exactly. And I
Wonderful.
completely appreciate it. I'm
Well, I
still
appreciate you, Todd.
inspired by you.
And I appreciate
Um,
everybody who's taken the time to join us here today. I can see you all on the line, and I really appreciate the comments.
yeah, it's been cool. It's definitely been cool. Well, Bill, we're gonna start doing these things on Sundays, and I hope you'll join us
Yeah,
for
I
our
love
group
it.
conversations. And maybe it'd be cool. We could just chat it up like we're all in a coffee shop, getting high in Amsterdam or something.
Well, and wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, I'm hoping that, I keep saying that culture is the new commodity and that we'll be focusing on that here in the United States. People will be getting together, being able to sit together, get high, and
Yeah,
and I think that's what cannabis really does. Cannabis makes friends, and
and people should start going to the nursing homes and smoking dope with the old folks.
clearly on that note, bringing them edibles too, obviously.
Oh yeah, bring the brownies, but and vaping, no smoking in the nursing home, no smoking,
Oh,
vaping.
come on. I'm gonna smoke till I'm dead. How dare you take my cannabis away?
Well, all right, there'll be an exception for those who can't handle it without the hot gas and particulate matter.
You're hilarious. Well, hopefully I don't get to that point because I've
All right.
I've always enjoyed. I don't smoke tobacco, but I've always smoked cannabis, and I learned how to roll my own joints when I was way too young to roll my own joints, and it's been working out really
I've
well
always
right
loved
now.
smoke. I never moved when the wind shifted at the campfire.
Yeah, hey, I think it's groovy, and hey, and thank you for bringing all this culture to us. So many decades before most people would realize the wonders of nature, and
Yep.
now it seems like everybody's catching up to where you were 50 years ago.
Well,
So,
it's fun now, and it's been fun, and I really it's fun talking to you, and then it's fun being in contact with all these folks who are on here commenting on the side. Thank you.
well, thank you, Bill. I'll also put your Instagram post, your handle up on the description with this as well.
Cool.
And,
All
you
right.
know, we'll be chatting some more. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, folks.
And I
Thank you, Todd.
hope you have a wonderful day, Bill.
Love you dearly. Bye bye.
You too, brother.